Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to CVUUS. Good morning. Welcome to our remote service. This is as a part of our summer series, Spirituality and the Arts. It's a beautiful, warm, midsummer day. No, it's not fall coming up. We have a whole half of summer left to do. So let's get outside and enjoy ourselves. I'm Carl Lindholm. I'm the worship associate today, and also I helped organize this service. Barnaby, our minister, is officially on vacation today, but he will join us later in the service in a video recording. If you're visiting us today, we hope you will check out our website and stay for the coffee hour at the end of the service. Today, the service is called Writing and the Spirit, and it's part of our series on spirituality and the art and the arts. The worship team this summer, as we were planning our services, noted how many writers we have in our congregation and thought we might do a service about writing and spirituality, writing and the spirit. We have poets, but today we'll probably acknowledge our prose writers. In fact, I had such a wonderful response to the soliciting prose writers that my hope is that we can do something when we're back in the sanctuary, or perhaps even before then, where we have a series of readings from some of these wonderful writers of prose. We have writers who write books. We have writers who write essays and articles, journals, blogs, stories. We have a series of CVUS's writers who write frequently in the local paper in a feature called Ways of Seeing. In fact, we thought we might even call this service Ways of Seeing. Some of our writers are published, some aren't. I did send out a note in our weekly blast soliciting writers and asking, why? Why do you write? What's your purpose and your process? How do you write? How does it fill you up? How does it feed your spirit? Today, we have 4 short reflections from our writers, and we also have a time for all ages from one of our writers. In the middle of the second part of the service, we will have a short visit with a very, very famous writer. Today also we're blessed to have original music by Kate Gridley. The prelude is a composition called Patterns. During the meditation, Kate will do an arrangement of one of our favorite hymns, Find a Stillness. And the postlude is another composition called Abstractions. Kate's music will be accompanied by images, which I hope are full screen images for you, of from my favorite photographer. Now, in a little bit, after the offering, we'll have milestones and passages, our joys and concerns for the week. If you have a milestone or a passage, please write it into the chat function here on your screen, and I will be sure to read it when the time comes. Now, so welcome. Now, for our call to worship, I'm calling upon an old friend, a friend from my 20s who spoke to me at that time, perhaps to you too. His name was Kurt Vonnegut. So it's a little bit of an unusual call to worship in that it's whimsical in some ways, but I think it makes a point. A couple of weeks ago, I mentioned that one of my quotations from the passages from Emerson that most pleases me is one that says, "We are only half ourselves, the other half is our expression." So Vonnegut admonishes us, if you want to really hurt your parents, the least you can do is go into the arts. I'm not kidding. The arts are not a way to make a living. They are a very human way of making life more bearable. Practicing an art, no matter how well or badly, is a way to make your soul grow, for heaven's sake. Sing in the shower, dance to the radio, tell stories, write a poem to a friend, even a lousy poem. Do it as well as you possibly can. You will get an enormous reward. You will have created something. God bless you, Mr. Rosewater. Now, chalice lighting. After Barnaby lights our chalice, I'll ask you to repeat the words with me that will appear on your screen. As we light the chalice, may our souls become its hearth. We join our hearts to the one great flame of bright compassion, beloved community, and fervent justice. May we become lanterns to the world, lighting the way for all. Now is the time for all ages. And today, the time for all ages will be presented by Bobby Loney, and it's entitled A Time to Play. Bobby has been a part of CVUUS for 20 years and has been volunteering in RE for most of that time. She's a founder of the Bridge School, where among other things, she produced all holiday shows where every child had a part, and she taught writing. She says it was a dream job. Since retiring in 2010, Bobby has written 3 novels, 1 for adults and 2 for young people, and is waiting to hear back from publishers while working on a 4th one. Bobby.
Thanks, Carl. I'm going to start with a quote from another Carl, almost as wise as ours. Carl Jung. He wrote, "Creation is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity. The creative mind plays with the objects it loves. I knew before I could read them that the objects I loved were books. I mean, how incredible is it that somebody invented letters to write down words, to write down sentences, to create whole other worlds that I could live in. I wanted to do that. And I found ways to play with these objects I loved over the years, but it wasn't until I retired that I fully showed up for myself and wrote. Writing doesn't just feed my spirit, it's where I meet my spirit and give it a voice. It's knowing and surprising myself at the same time. Like when I was a kid and played dolls, we didn't say with dolls. It was, let's play dolls. I dressed them and monkeyed with their hair, but they spoke for themselves. When kids play, they make structures, characters, songs, mud pies. We have fancy names for when grown-ups do that, like architect and composer. We say, I'm a gardener, when what we do is love dirt. Showing up for myself means giving my wishes and dreams actual time and an actual place. And if I didn't, my writing wouldn't have a chance. So I write 3 pages stream of consciousness every morning, and I never look at it again. And I work on a book 2 hours, 5 days a week. The idea for one of my books, Jenny's Law, woke me from a deep sleep, and to my consternation, included a cat already named Jenny, and was about guns. It was a few weeks after we failed to get gun safety laws passed in 2016. I knew plenty about Vermont and guns, but now I had to learn about dairy farming and showing a calf at field days and more. So field trips, interview, notes, voices coming from who knows where to be recorded. Then transferring all of that to separate sticky notes and arranging them on our dining room table. Building a book, rearranging. The first draft, which always feels like understudies are filling in until the real actors walk on stage. And then the fun of revisions and surprising changes. Until 2 years later, I was done. Then, oof. Another horrific school shooting in Parkland, Florida on Valentine's Day. I watched in amazement and gratitude as kids from here did what my kids in Jenny's Law had done, marching, testifying in Montpelier to push for gun safety laws. And laws passed. It felt like a miracle. It also felt like I'd been punched. It had just happened in real life, my book, in real life, so I put Jenny's Law away. I shelved Ruby and Cooper Brown and their cat, Jenny. But they sat up there and they looked at me. And they looked at me. I mean, I'd given them birth. How could I just abandon them like that? So, major revision. And I sent it in and I got a response. Revised it for middle schoolers and they'd consider it. I shelved it again. More looks, more nagging. I revised it. I sent it in and I'm waiting. It's essential. It's essential for me to do what I love, especially now. And I'm lucky to be able to. But what if everyone did, even for just a half hour a day? What if everyone made time and a place to play around with something they love? What if everyone acted from their inner necessity? I think those things need our respect. They are essential workers. And now I'm going to finish with the voice of 13-year-old Ruby Brown writing to her friend Amra. Cooper went back to school, but with a wheelchair. One of my teachers said, "You'll be glad to get back to normal." But I thought to myself, we'll never have normal again. People think things are okay, but people around them are pretending and making the best of things. Nobody talks about it, because what kind of world would it be if everybody said out loud what was going on inside all the time? There would be hugging and crying all over the place. I read in a magazine at the dentist that people need 12 hugs a day. But how do they know that? Did they have different groups getting different numbers of hugs and spy on them? 8 hugs, smiling, but a little complaining. 16 hugs, laughing so hard they float to the ceiling like Mary Poppins. Average, 12. If I got 12 hugs a day, I'd be blubbering all day long. Thank you.
Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to seek what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. And may we walk in peace. Let us open our eyes to see what is beautiful. Let us open our minds to seek what is true. Let us open our hearts to love one another. And may we walk in peace.
Now is the time in our service for our offering. And this is a way for us to contribute materially to this, our faith community. The instructions on how to give in the offering will be up on a screen. And each month we share the plate, share half of our offering to an organization or an entity doing good in the world. This month, the offering is supporting the NAACP, Legal Defense and Education Fund. The Legal Defense Fund is the country's first and foremost civil and human rights legal organization and works to secure full and fair access to democratic citizenship by promoting equality in education, voting, and political participation, economic justice, and criminal justice. The donations ministries chose LDF as a tie-in to the NAACP-led virtual march on Washington on August 28th, which is designed to coincide with the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. More than ever before, the LDF needs our support. Now, let's take a couple minutes at this point in the service for prayer and meditation. And the music during this prayer and meditation will be by Kate Gridley, and it's as she put it, a riff on the hymn Find a Stillness. Our first reflection on writing and the spirit is offered by our friend Johanna Nichols. Johanna, and it's called, the title of her essay or reflection is Becoming a Writer. Johanna was parish minister from 1888 to 2010. She was a parish minister from 1988 to 2010, and she's the minister emerita of CVUUS. In 2019, she retired from Eastview at Middlebury and moved to her hometown of Montpelier. She's active there in her home church and is a member of the Montpelier Senior Activities Center. Johanna loves being the grandmother of Ella and Maya, and she loves reading and writing.
I want to thank Carl for asking the question, are you a writer? I was an English major because I loved to read. Reading was central to being a teacher and a minister. But, writer? There were 3 people who influenced my writing. Elizabeth Branch was a summa cum laude graduate from Middlebury College who taught me to diagram sentences. Later in transformational generative grammar, I was excited to learn that no matter how much we study the great writers, we each have our own style, like a fingerprint. T. Allen Broughton came to UVM in 1966, just in time to teach expository writing. First and foremost a writer, he was a gifted teacher. As he polished my skills, I began to enjoy writing, but I continued on to teaching. In considering the ministry, I was so focused on creating worship and pastoral care and spiritual development that I didn't imagine that writing would be the keystone of the next 20 years. 6 years into ministry, I engaged an editor, a member of the congregation in Maine, and she influenced how I crafted a sermon. I wanted to weave a sermon. Better to be read than to be heard. She urged me to clump ideas, to craft a sermon that invited listeners to travel with me without getting lost. I loved the reading and research and thinking that happened before I sat down to write. I wrote sermons longhand because it engaged my mind and body. My thoughts flowed onto the paper, and sometimes, like a wave clears the sand, whole sentences would either wash away or take new form. In Carl Sandburg's house in Flat Rock, North Carolina, there are walls of books, and each book has little tabs of paper marking some page. How, I wonder, did he ever know which tab would lead him to his source? At one time in my ministry, my personal reference shelves contain over 800 books, and each one a friend. It comes with the ministry to observe the ironies, the exigencies, the changes, the surprises, the humor, and the mysteries of life. I lifted up the gem of an idea to look at it in the light, and then turned it to view a different facet. We see it this way. What if we look at it another way? I was dedicated to going deeper to see if I could discover further meaning. It was when I began to write for Ways of Seeing in the Addison Independent that I realized that though the teaching and the ministry were done, I still enjoyed writing. When I'm inspired or horrified by something, a poem, a reading, a song, the news, something that challenges me to think and feel, that I am stirred to study it and write about it, even if it is only a conversation with the paper. I write about what I encounter everywhere around me, to be in conversation with life. I write, as Carl describes, to clarify the complexity of the world. Or as Emerson described it, as dealing out his life passed through the fire of thought. I am a writer of personal essays who writes to the music of words. I study life. I write letters to life, to be in dialogue with my life and the lives of others. I am a writer.
Thank you so much, Johanna. You are a writer indeed. Thanks for those lovely thoughts and sentiments. Our second reflection will be offered by Paul Seward, and the title of his essay is Semolina and Samadhi. I had to look those up. Pasta and the Inner Light. Pasta and the Inner Light. Paul was born in New York City and raised in a boarding school in the Adirondacks. After medical school, he practiced pediatrics, but after 6 years changed to emergency medicine, which he practiced for the next several decades. And of course, he's written a wonderful book about his experience as an emergency room physician. He and his wife, Linda, retired to Eastview in 2017.
When Carl asked if I would write something about writing and spirituality, two questions immediately came to mind. What is spirituality? And equally important, what is writing? I'll start with writing. Writing is an activity not unlike trying to knit a sweater out of spaghetti. Such a task has two parts. First, you grab an assortment of spaghetti of different sizes, shapes, and colors, throw them in a pot, and cook them until they're soft enough to bend but firm enough to hold together. Then you scrape the whole mess onto a plate. Now comes the hard part. Strand by strand, color by color, you carefully try to knit them together into something that you might wear. In so doing, you will discover that most of the spaghetti doesn't fit and must be eaten. You will even find that some particularly good strands must be eaten because there's no good place to put them. But if you are lucky, persistent, and practiced, it's just possible that you might wind up with something that is not only elegant, but delicious, and particularly with a little pesto on the side. Similarly, any writing worth doing also involves a messy creation in which you throw words on the page while thinking as little as possible about what they might say. This catastrophe must then be followed by hours upon hours of detailed and precise rewriting. And like with spaghetti sweaters, the real work occurs not in the wild creativity, but in the meticulous assembly. There's a third similarity as well. No matter how beautiful your spaghetti sweater turns out, very few people are looking to buy wearable pasta. So you need to have some better reason than fame, riches, and the applause of multitudes for even bothering to try. The same is true for writing. While there are certainly people whose writing sells in the millions, the rest of us have to have a reason to do it for its own sake, regardless of whether anyone other than ourselves will ever read a single word of it. Fortunately, there is. Or at least there is for me. I started writing in the 5th grade, and in the years since I've written short stories, poems, medical articles, philosophy papers, many hundreds of letters to family and friends, one unpublished novel, and a memoir. Of these, only the articles in the memoir ever saw publication. But was all that creativity, all those thousands of first drafts and rewrites a waste of time? Absolutely not. Every one of them taught me a little more about how to turn fuzzy ideas into logical arguments and vague storylines into a real narrative. In short, they taught me how to think and communicate in words with other people, but most of all, with myself. Which brings me to spirituality. And particularly with a little pesto on the side. Similarly, any writing worth doing also involves a messy creation in which you throw words on the page while thinking as little as possible about what they might say. This catastrophe must then be followed by hours upon hours of detailed and precise rewriting. And like with spaghetti sweaters, the real work occurs not in the wild creativity, but in the meticulous assembly. There's a third similarity as well. No matter how beautiful your spaghetti sweater turns out, very few people are looking to buy wearable pasta. So you need to have some better reason than fame, riches, and the applause of multitudes for even bothering to try. The same is true for writing. While there are certainly people whose writing sells in the millions, the rest of us have to have a reason to do it for its own sake, regardless of whether anyone other than ourselves will ever read a single word of it. Fortunately, there is. Or at least there is for me. I started writing in the 5th grade, and in the years since I've written short stories, poems, medical articles, philosophy papers, many hundreds of letters to family and friends, one unpublished novel, and a memoir. Of these, only the articles in the memoir ever saw publication. But was all that creativity, all those thousands of first drafts and rewrites, a waste of time? Absolutely not. Every one of them taught me a little more about how to turn fuzzy ideas into logical arguments and vague storylines into a real narrative. In short, they taught me how to think and communicate in words with other people, but most of all, with myself. Which brings me to spirituality. Spirituality is a blurry concept. On the one end of it are mystical experiences, the great white light, or the enlightenment experience that meditation can sometimes bring. But there is also a more subtle spirituality of action and reason. Is there a God? If so, what might she be like? What might she want from us? What is the source of consciousness? And what does that tell us about who we really are? An understanding of these questions requires not simply information, but thinking about and writing about them enough to understand how to act upon them. In my case, one important action was to go to medical school. That was a choice that surprised me almost as much as it surprised my parents. I'd spent my first 3 years wandering aimlessly through the humanities. It was only at the end of my junior year when, out of desperation for something meaningful to do, I decided to actually finish my pre-med requirement and apply to medical school. Then something interesting happened. I discovered that there was a question that commonly appeared on applications, very basic, but also very heartfelt. They wanted to know, why do you want to be a doctor? The surprising part was my discovery that somewhere in all the reading I had done and all the letters I had written, I'd found my answer. This is what I wrote. I want to become a doctor because it seems to me that medicine offers a unique opportunity to do two things. First, to learn in detail what a human being really is. And second, to use the knowledge and tools that I had been given in that study in order to help human beings. It's not a terribly profound idea, but it was mine. And how would I come to it? From all that aimless wandering through the humanities, reading the classics, reading some philosophy, and above all, writing all those papers that such courses required. Almost without my realizing what was happening, a fuzzy idea that medicine seemed a good thing to do had become a reason to make it a career. I've never looked back. And I've never stopped writing. The way I look at it is that even if I am still mostly making sweaters out of spaghetti, if I work hard enough, think carefully enough, and then write clearly enough, now and then I may make something that is both true and delicious, even if I am the only customer.
Thanks so much, Paul. I'm here to announce that at next year's Rhubarb Festival, we'll be selling spaghetti sweaters. Paul also touches a nerve that when he says that if you love to write, often you can't make a living as a writer. That's been the case with me. I loved having a career in education where I had to write both for practical purposes, administrative purposes, and teaching my classes. But I know I'm a writer because I used to teach at the Breadloaf Young Writers Conference, and they gave me this lanyard to wear. It says Carl Lindholm Writer, so I keep it right up next to my desk. Now, at this point, before we have reflections 3 and 4, I just want to take a minute to acknowledge and celebrate a famous writer in our midst. We do have a famous writer in our midst. This writer in our midst, one of us, has been interviewed again and again on national television. He's had profiles written in popular magazines, Parade, People, just recently in Oprah's magazine, O. There's an audio of his book. Oh, let me hold up his book. I hope you all have his book. Do you all have this book? You should. It's selling like hotcakes. The audio version, if you want to listen to it in your car, is available. The audio version was recorded at the Folklife Center here in town, and the technician, the most helpful person, was Eric Meyer, son of Priscilla and Stephen. So it's Francois Clemons. Is Francois with us this morning? I hope. Let's all wave to Francois. Congratulations, Francois. And I promised Francois that I've promised it'd be a wonderful activity, but when we're able to get back into the sanctuary and we're able to crowd the people in that want to hear him read from this wonderful book, we'll do it. We'll have a session with Francois. Francois tells me he's writing every day. He's writing what he hopes to be a sequel to Officer Clemons. He's hoping to get his short stories published, his children's stories published. So Francois is a writer indeed. When I asked him if he would read a snippet from Officer Clemons, he said he wished he would, but it was not easy to find a snippet. Francois doesn't deal much in snippets, but he said he would sing a snippet for us. And so what we have is a little musical interlude here with Francois Clemons. And congratulations, Francois, on the wonderful success of your book.
In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus, give me Jesus, give me Jesus, you may have all of this world, but give me Jesus.
Thank you, Francois. It's always great to hear you sing, to hear your wonderful voice. Our third reflection is offered by Lise Anderson, and it's titled, Don't Be Afraid to Take a Leap and Go Deep. Lise moved to Cornwall with her husband, Miles Peterly, in 2017. She was a member of the First Unitarian Universalist congregation of Ann Arbor for 10 years before joining CVUUS. And these days she edits research grants long distance and enjoys growing raspberries and sewing masks.
Good morning. Today's theme made me think of how writers often wonder, why am I doing this? And what exactly am I doing when they write, especially memoir writers? I researched and wrote a book that I self-published in 2013. My father was an ad man in New York City in the 50s and 60s who died unexpectedly in Tokyo, Japan in 1974 when I was 15. Many years later, when my mother died, I found a manuscript for a novel he'd started, and in 2003 I decided to look up his friends and colleagues to explore what led to his death. The project resulted in a memoir I called The Lost Chapters. I used his manuscript as a source document to research the book, for leads as to characters and events. I was like an archaeologist looking for clues. It was fiction, but it was pretty transparent who was whom, and he had made notes. The memoir shares my adventure of looking for him, his family history that I learned for the first time, and the series of misjudgments and human failings that left him alone in Tokyo. But I also used the manuscript as a source of text. I paid a student typist to enter it all in computer, and that made it possible to tweak the most complete bits and weave several of them into the memoir. People told me it worked really well. So fast forward, 2 years after the book, I turned back to the manuscript again. I loved the faded pages with my dad's pencil edits. How could I just put it back in the closet? I wanted to do something more with his writing. I decided to reimagine Alan Robinson, the fictional character my father had created. Dad wrote him as a cynical man who was disdainful of the advertising business and bored by everything, much like he was at 46 years old, close to the end of his life. I decided to give Alan the hope that Dad might have had he not been a depressed alcoholic. I started ordering the pages of vignettes, chapters, and rewrites, constructing the storyline, and edited the most complete chapters. And then, feeling courageous, I wrote more chapters using his starts, his dialogue, his 1960s streetscapes, the sound of a checker cab door closing. I haven't mentioned my conflicts over his bigoted attitudes and sexist treatment of women. That's for a longer talk. Not to give it all away, but I created a female character who would be the hero of the story. Thus began a serial blog that I called An Ad Man's New York Summer, 1967. He had called his novel The Summer Bachelor, the story of an ad man, of what ad men were up to alone in the city when the family goes away for the summer. For me, writing for online followers felt novel. I wrote 15 posts ahead of time, posted them once a week, and kept writing more. Of course, I'm not much of a marketer, so only 30 or 40 people ever read it. But I thought what I was doing was unusual. Who has ever sourced content from unpublished writing to use in this way? And what writer gets to riff off their dad's humor or complete a scene he hadn't finished? And this gets to why I reached out to Carl to share this writing reflection. What was I doing? I didn't have a name for it at first. I was working somewhere between heavy editing and what felt like collaboration. I worried, was it ethical? Although I gave attribution to my father, was I plagiarizing? Or was I ghostwriting? Real ghostwriting, like writers who complete projects for deceased authors. Like them, I was trying to understand and channel my author. But was I being deceptive? I didn't have permission. I changed the storyline and developed characters. I inserted a little empathy and self-reflection where there was none. I wanted to show him how unexpectedly beautiful life could be. I told it the way I thought the story might have gone, had the author been a spiritually healthy person. I wanted to show him another way. Talking to other agency men who had survived advertising, I had learned that their later lives had gone in all different directions. One became a sculptor, another a psychiatrist. There was plenty of hope to go around in the 1970s. My father had alcoholism. Codependent? Unethical? Obsessed? I actually wrote one post exploring my writing process and wondering at the therapeutic element as well. I see you psychologists smiling out there. I think the blog was a way to have an honest conversation with him and with myself. I worked with him, but I also worked against him. I fixed him, an unhealthy thing we children of alcoholics think we can do. But I also spent time with him in midlife, and that was a gift. Thank you for letting me share. Keep writing.
Thank you so much, Lise. Lise said that would, at one point in that essay, she said, well, that would be an occasion for a longer talk. Well, I hope we can have that longer talk because I think this sounds like fascinating work as she explored her relationship with her dad, her flawed dad. Now, our last speaker, our last reflector is our minister, Barnaby Feeder. I asked him to do this, even though he is on vacation. because I think he may be, and I'd be happy to know if I'm wrong, the one person in our congregation who actually made a living as a writer, put food on the table. And so I asked him to reflect on that part of his life. And he did. He's given us a short essay on the who, what, when, where, and why path to spirituality. Now, Barnaby grew up in San Francisco and came east to attend Williams College, a small, obscure school of little consequence in western Massachusetts, near Vermont. After college, Barnaby embarked on a career in journalism, interrupted by 3 years in the study of law at Berkeley School of Law in the University of California. He worked for the New York Times for 27 years, and he's beginning his 9th year as our minister and will be back in the pulpit to lead water communion on September 6th.
Please breathe with me. As you breathe in, imagine yourself speaking from deep inside the words, I love you. And as you exhale, say thank you. When you get to the you part of breathing in or out, feel free to speak to yourself, anyone you love, the earth, the universe, God, whatever you name as holy. I love you, thank you. And breathe again. And that's it. That's the connection for me between spirituality and my career as a journalist. I longed for work that called me to breathe that way as I was working. And journalism proved to be that kind of work for me for a long, long time. I didn't see the spirituality journalism connections at first, of course. How many of us see anything vital when we are newly minted 18-year-old first-year college students? I wrote my first newspaper article that September for the Williams College Record because my junior advisor happened to be managing editor and a fellow member of the drum section of the marching band. He asked me to write something funny about the band, and when I arrived at the newspaper office to hand it in, I found him jumping like a maniac from desktop to desktop, proclaiming, I am the editor, this world is mine, mine, mine. He grabbed my copy as he swooped by and said, your next assignment is on the bulletin board. And so it was, written out in elaborate Mission Impossible language. All I saw at that point was the joy of the business. But that wasn't what hooked me. Each week, I was teased by that basic spiritual question. What is meaningful about this work? And each assignment implied that basic religious question. How do we share truth with each other? Civil rights, the Vietnam War, secret fraternities, town gown relations, these and other meaty issues came my way as assignments. The voice in my head as I did them was that of my 8th grade teacher who had admonished me, if you can't say it, you don't know it, and if you can say it, you can write it. During my first winter study, I interned at KQED, the San Francisco public television station. I had applied there because I read that striking San Francisco Chronicle reporters and editors were each night assembling at KQED to broadcast their work as an impromptu, wildly popular newspaper of the air. It was thrilling to watch it come together right down to the daily editorial cartoon. Later, I did an independent study, the newspapers of New England, the family-owned newspapers. And when I arranged an independent study after that, it was covering 2 nearby Vermont towns for the local newspaper, the North Adams, Massachusetts Transcript. That was the year the famous Pentagon Papers expose unfolded in the New York Times and Washington Post. And I started full-time work at the Transcript as a reporter the Monday after I graduated from college. I worked there through the Watergate scandal, in which journalists brought a corrupt presidency crashing down. In short, I entered journalism at the peak of idealism about the role of journalists in society and the values they defend. But there was one other thing that drew me in, a self-awareness that I was a better me in a profession that forced me to begin each day questioning my assumptions and asking others for information. It also forced me into the ethic of taking public responsibility immediately for my errors. Reporting and writing the news for my neighbors, every bit of it, from weddings and obituaries to natural disasters to local politics, long and short, and creating features, some of which I learned to supplement with my own photography, made the spirituality of writing religious for me. For that is what religion is, spirituality in community. It's no coincidence that I returned to my UU upbringing and began attending the local UU church when I started my career as a professional writer at the Transcript. When I was fortunate enough to reach the New York Times at age 30 in 1980, the spirituality of it all deepened for me. The community I needed to regard as neighbors became global, and I was repeatedly challenged to learn more about what I love you can and should mean. But it all started in a local rural newspaper in a community much like Middlebury. Will you breathe with me? I love you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Barnaby. I hope you're enjoying your vacation today. Thanks so much to Richard Hopkins, too, who is the man behind the scenes today, and Rich Wolfson, who gathered the video materials together. Thanks to Kate Gridley and for her wonderful original music. She will be, we'll hear the postlude in just a few seconds. So I would only offer as closing words, thanks to Lucy, who's going to do who will help us with the coffee hour coming right up. If you're on YouTube, you can just go to our webpage, and at the very top, there's a link. Top left, there's a link that will get you zoomed in, I think, I hope, I trust. Just leave you with these words that I'm sure you have heard from me in the past, because they consistently inspire me. The words from Emerson, from his essay, Nature. They help me in this strange and distressing world we're living in now. It's still a world of wonder and awe. Emerson wrote, if the stars should appear one night in 1,000 years, how we would believe and adore, and preserve for many generations the remembrance of the city of God which had been shown. But every night come out these envoys of beauty and light the universe with their admonishing smile. Thank you all.